Hey, what's going on?
Marco,
I guess today this will be my first podcast with this new feature that I guess YouTube's letting us do. I guess if you have so many subscribers, you get to use this feature. So we're going to try it out today. I've got, we're going to interview Jon Hart Crane. Jon Hart Crane is an advocate in weather modification. He's interviewed all types of people all across the country. He's done a lot of trips. And so I think what I'd like to talk about is one of your interviews with that had to do with ionic heaters. And ionic heaters basically are these antenna systems that are located all over the world. And some countries have larger ones, and I think the Netherlands is making the biggest one on this planet. I heard it could like move Pluto or something. But the one we're going to be talking about is HARP, an American array. And Jon Hart Crane, you knew one of the workers there, correct?
how you doing, Marco?
Good, good. Hey, it's great to have you on today. Are you guys getting any snow up there in Cleveland Heights?
No snow. It's just a little bit of rain and sleet at this point. Probably
Yeah.
treacherous to be driving.
Nice blue
It's been a
skies,
very
right?
mild winter so far.
Very. And all the nice blue skies.
All the nice blue skies. Yeah, we could definitely say that what they did to it yesterday, and why we might be having rain today because or just some sleet as opposed to snow. Everything's a little bit warmer when they do those things up in those blue skies.
Yeah. Well, aren't they dimming them, making them white? Is that
Well,
right?
that's one recent thing that came out in news articles. We had our wonderful man BG Bill with the Golden
Yep.
Gate Bridge, right? If you know what I'm talking about. I'm just being very very coy with some of my words, Marco, but
Thank you.
he recently came out with an article talking about DIMing the sun. And most people didn't catch that, but they've been doing that for a very, very long time, using all types of different techniques that have been deployed on the general public since our main man back in the 60s, our presidents back then, before he was, um, what would you say happened to him in Dallas, Texas? We won't say that. What we all know who I'm talking about right now is our president who was in Dallas, Texas. He went to the United Nations and talked about nuclear proliferation and weather modification in the same sentence. That should be kind of a ding, 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 ding for everyone who's watching or whoever gets to see this. Modifying our atmosphere, our weather, is a very complex issue, and they've been doing it since the 60s. There's legislation about it. There's a great website called weathermodificationhistory.com, which has 1,000 documents that go back to 1890. And when I first started learning about some of this stuff, I said, wow, this is some interesting information that they've been doing this to our land and our air and our water, the law, for a very, very long time. And so this is what we're born into. So I started investigating even more, and I started finding out about our topic tonight from a person that I interviewed.
I, I was going to say, when you said they've been doing it since 1960, you know, I know one of the biggest weather modifications in the 1960s was the Vietnam. I believe the planes were called patches, and they sprayed Agent Orange over Vietnam to the point of they sprayed so many tons of it that it covered the. I calculated that it would have covered Vietnam 4 times over.
You
Okay,
got to
and
be
that was
kidding me.
like, and that was spraying out of planes. That what's that 70 years ago? So you know what? They were doing this in during the Cold War. Or I'm not. It wasn't the Cold War. I'm sorry, during Vietnam. So they are really good at that. I mean, 70 years or 60 years. I think they're really good at that. And then you also said that that philanthropist, that guy. I don't want to say his name, but
Right.
he just recently said that he wants to spray sulfur above North Pole to dim reflect the sun so more ice grows. Do you know the same guy? We're talking about the millionaire, right? We know who he is. Uh,
BG, that's what I said. Bill, the
yeah,
Golden
yeah,
Gate
Billy.
Bridge.
Billy. Do you know that he has a patent on putting sulfur on not weather balloons, but huge balloons that do the same thing. And this patent is about 10 to 20 years old. So if he's talking about it now, don't you think they've been doing it for a long time, like you said?
Absolutely. Ever since the airplanes were put up in the sky and all these other techniques that you can find out at weathermodificationhistory.com. You talked about the Vietnam event that happened back then. There's an operation, not paperclip, but Operation Popeye, which their
Oh, yeah.
motto was make mud, not war. So they've been doing this for a long time. And shortly after Vietnam, they came up with 1978. This is a piece of legislation, everybody. The 1978 Environmental Modification Bill, signed by 48 countries. Russia signed it. Jimmy Carter signed it. I almost said BG again, but Jimmy Carter, our president back then, said it. So that's a piece of legislation that actually lets you know that they are modifying the weather. So when I began diving into this a little bit more, I started finding all these individuals that have been studying this for years, had a wealth of knowledge, and I wanted to go out and interview them. And I have all these interviews that are still in the can, so to speak. They're going to be edited and released on the Jon Hart Crane channel. They'll also be on Facebook, where I'm known as TheLone Nigro, LONE, TheLone Nigro. But one of the individuals I met, was in January of 2020. Does everyone remember? Think back where you were in January of 2020, before everything kind of went haywire with being
We
put
know.
into your home, right?
Yeah.
Where were you in January 2020, Marko? Do you remember?
Yeah. Yeah, I know exactly where I was at and what was going on, but we're not going to use any of those words today.
Okay,
Everybody knows
right.
what we're talking about, but go ahead.
Well, I decided at that point in mid-January to go find this gentleman by the name of Billy Hayes. Billy the Harp Man Hayes. He is, quote unquote, the last surviving installer of the HARP array, which was put up in Alaska in the mid 90s during the Clinton administration. And all these people that went up there to create that HARP array in Alaska, they're all gone. And Billy Hayes just passed away this past year, which is unfortunate. But I was able to go to Dodge City, Kansas, and get into an Army base hospital and break him out for 3 days for an interview.
Wow. That must have been you mentioned everybody that worked on the HARP array is no longer with us. So you ever wonder maybe why? You think maybe some little electromagnetic fields or maybe some, I don't know, harmonics, or what do you think? Or is it just normal that everybody dies that works on a project like that?
It seems like very much people die that are on a project like that. They know who's working on it. They get dialed in to the system, so to speak, when they're building something like that, and then they can take them out one by one. Billy proclaimed many times that they were always trying to take him out, and they were always monitoring what he was doing. He was more or less a whistleblower on many different fronts, working through whatever agency, and then also was heavily into electronics, installing cell phone systems across the board, super darns in Kansas, and anywhere that they needed someone, a technician that knew how to work with cell phone towers or arrays like the HARP array. He was their man to call. And so I went out there to Kansas and interviewed him for 3 days at the last stage of his life, and became very good friends with him because of that.
Wow. And you will one of these days put some of those interviews on your site for people to listen to, correct?
Well, all these interviews are in the can. Billy, when at one point he gave me a piece of advice. He said, "John, be very careful." He's like, careful with what you're doing right now and what you're going out and you're doing, and also how you release this stuff. You might want to wait just a little bit, because once you start releasing and once you start putting this stuff out there and once you put yourself out there, you will be marked, you will be targeted. Billy most definitely was a targeted man. He almost had 9 lives, so to speak, because of all the times they tried to take him out, and that's why he was put into a nursing home, an Army-based nursing home. And when he talk to me about all this stuff, he sometimes he would just want me to cut off the camera. He's like, no, don't record me anymore. I don't want to talk about this just yet. And so there's some information that was lost with him. He has a family, a very large family. The man had 5 wives. He
Nope.
was once on the Jerry Springer show, and he also had 14 children. And so they were spread out all over the place. And all he ever really wanted to do was provide for them as best as he could and make their lives as spectacular as they could. But he was kind of a player to a degree. And
Now
but
it sounds like it. That's a lot of kids, a lot of wives, right?
14 kids, right? Yeah,
It's
5
okay. Hey,
wives. And he
now that
constantly had, I don't know, I mean, when you look at Billy, he kind of had a mustache a little bit like this, but a little bit thicker. And he was definitely older, and he definitely had a look to him. But if you put the 3 of us together, I don't know who was better looking, but that guy he could go out and get any woman he wanted. He just knew how
wow.
to do it.
Now when he was working, that harps array system. I remember like when you looked it up and what they try to tell the general public, let's say the collectives, they say that it was used for communication with submarines. And that's okay because the way that system works is yes, you can communicate with submarines. But then they would also say that they would send waves and it was kind of like subsurface interface radar. I'm not sure that's the term I want to use, but it was a radar type system. And what they could do with the system is they could fly an airplane over an area, let's say the United States, and the airplane could have, let's say, aluminum oxide or particulate and disperse it. And then they could shoot this harp into it and bounce it down to earth. And then the rebound would give a frequency and a sound that they could decipher what it is. And they did this across I mean, you can't find this stuff, but they did do this. And I believe they know exactly. That's why we know where all the oil reserves are at. And think about all the land grabs that were done back in the days. And who's our favorite president? He had a girlfriend. In the White House. Remember him? And he went and grabbed all this land from everybody. And he kicked all those people off the lands. Back then the loggers were using the government land. They owned 50% of the Midwest, the government. He kicked them all off the land. And I wonder why. Because these harp arrays found oil, and guess what else they found? Now our new president, Mr. Mumbles, he is going to start digging for cobalt and for battery metals. Okay, on our government, and guess who found all that stuff? Harp. Harp did all this, so it wasn't just talking to submarines, right? And you'll tell me that they also use it to move the jet stream, right? And that's a whole other thing we'll talk about here in a second. But the bottom line was our president took land away, and now all of a sudden we're going to start mining for batteries, okay, metals, cobalt, copper, and I believe lithium. We have a huge deposit of lithium, and HARP can find this. And not to mention, think about what else happened after our buddy, Billy, started taking land. We started fracking. And how do they know where to frack? HARP. So that HARP machine does a lot more than talk to submarines.
Whoever's still listening to us and is tuning in and is trying to understand this, I'm much more of a novice than Marko is. Marko actually helped me come along to this perspective and understanding what is actually going on in this world system that we have. And Billy put it in a different way regarding HARP and this atmosphere. He essentially said that our atmosphere is like an electronic board with capacitors, electrodes, nodes, and everything, where they can manipulate it. And that's what they've been trying to do for a long time. The other thing that would make more sense in terms of HARP sending a signal up and then also down is Billy talked about a thumping mechanism, mechanism that would send something up and something down. And the best way of describing it to me, and in my simple novice understanding, were windmills. Billy was situated in Dodge City, Kansas, where he more or less proclaimed that as the capital for weather modification. Dodge City has an airport in the center with a NEXRAD radar system at that airport, surrounded by windmills as far as the eye can see, north, south, east, and west for miles along the interstates. So this is an epicenter for how they modify our weather. Now, what he said about the windmills was that as it spins, what's happening? Thump, 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 times three, each thump, thump, as they go around. Those are also signal generators, also sending something up and something down into the ground. And that's a little bit like what this HARP array up in Alaska would do in terms of searching out whatever the military would like to search for or manipulate.
Interesting. But it was a multiple use facility. I mean, they could actually it was it's not a strong one compared to some of the other ones around the world. And in a minute, I'd like you to tell everybody how you could find this stuff. But there's a site you can go to, and these harps could actually beam up enough voltage to create so much heat in the upper atmospheres to actually move the jet stream. Now, if you could move the jet stream, you could move the weather. And that's what it was all about. By moving the jet stream, they could move the weather. And I know you remember this. 5 years ago, HARP heated up the sky, and it was around November. They heated up, and you could actually look up on one of these sites. I believe it was Earth Null School, and you would see a heat anomaly from space. Okay, and then what it did is it moved the polar vortex, and Europe froze. They froze their butts off in December and January, and I was watching these HARP arrays, all of them, and all of a sudden you look at the Russia, and you would see their HARP arrays starting to heat up and create anomalies right around. And I'll never forget this, right around first week or second week of January. And I'm like, oh my God. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. So I was first dove into this and was shocked watching it from the Earth Mill School on the Mike Morales channel, Above Ground World News. And HARP wasn't it, there. All these heaters are all over the place on the planet. HARP wasn't actually active at the time, but what we saw was this frequency shot out of, I think, Norway that split the polar vortex into two, and then one that came out of China or Russia that split it into three. And it went all down south because the vortex moves during the winter from the north down to the south hemisphere. And that vortex shocked me. I said, what is that heat anomaly coming out of Russia and China and breaking this thing apart? It was incredible to see that thing. And so these are what all these elements, or these, you want to call them programs, and they essentially are programs, but all these arrays that are around the planet, that's what they do. So this
And
was in December of 2018, and they did it
yeah.
twice, also in January, and Mike Morales picked it up. And that's when I said, wow, Mike Morales is an amazing person to be documenting this every single night that he can, to tell people what they're doing to the weather. We call it WW, but I won't say what that is.
I remember when that happened. And back then I was using Mike Morales and a couple other people, and I would do my own Cleveland forecast for the gardeners. And I was always going 14 to 24 days out. And I remember this because on on my Facebook, I said when these arrays, when they split them, the polar vortex is going to freeze us up. And I remember I put on my Facebook, I says, folks, it's going to be negative 18 in Cleveland and negative 33 in Wisconsin. And people were like, you're crazy. And there's a newscaster, okay, he's a professional newscaster, and on television. He happens to was on my site, and he goes, "What makes you the authority? How do you know it's going to be negative 18 degrees? It wasn't negative 18 for decades, right? It was like completely insane, right? But I saw the polar vortex. I watched Mike Morales. It was there, and you could see it moving every day. And sure enough, it started getting closer and closer. And about 7 days before, he went on TV saying, it's going to get really cold. It's going to get really cold in the negative numbers. And guess what? It went down to -8. And it went
Marco,
down to -17 because
you
they
know what
moved
we
the.
call those meteorologists, right? What the phrase we use for them?
Well,
Those
tell me.
meteorologists, we call them salad boys and salad girls because all they're doing is just dishing up lettuce. They're dishing up nothing. They're just roughage. There's no real
Exactly.
information. You're getting 20% of the radar every single night from your local and mainstream news of the weather. And you want to be able to trust the weather, right? Well, you can't. You can't even trust that.
No.
20% of the radar is being deployed upon the masses, the dumbasses, right? From mainstream, right?
Oh, my
So
God.
what we get from Mike Morales is 100% of the radar. Now, the other thing that you can do is go to another website called Climate Viewer 3D. climateviewer3d.com.org by Jim Lee. And he has the most amazing, most powerful website I have ever seen. And it's probably next up to the WEF, World Economic Yep. Not going to say everything.
Yeah, don't say
That
that whole
website,
word.
though, they actually have funding and money behind it. Jim did Climate Viewer 3D all on his own, and it is an amazing website that shows you everything, and you can dive deep into it and select certain things around the planet as to how they manipulate and modify our atmosphere.
He actually, we're talking about HARP arrays and ionic heaters. And on one of his pages, you could actually look up every single ionic heater on his planet. You could look at what they put out, where they're at, how old they are, what they use them for, and the ones that are being built and the ones that aren't working anymore. We had one in South America collapse just recently, and not only that, I know he has stuff about these people who modify the weather. Like the what's that guy that put out the fires in Tasmania a couple of years ago, and he made it rain in the desert.
Right now, David Icke is on my mind because I was just watching a video of David Icke, but his name is David, isn't it?
Yes, what's his name?
It's slipping my mind.
Remember he told Australia for $1 billion or a million he was going to put out the fires for him.
I'm having a frequency fart right now, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but this guy's been around. He's a weather modification guy, and he's been around for decades. I mean, he put fires out. He makes it rain like in deserts. I mean, he took a hurricane. I'll never forget this because I think I watched this live on Morales, where he took a hurricane, and as it was coming into Australia, he says, "Oh, okay, let's go back out." And he took the hurricane back out to the ocean. Then he says, let's bring it back in. Brought it back in, and says, you know what? Let's take it out one more time. Back out, and he brought it back in for the third time and hit land with it. I think that was a 2017 or 18. Do you remember that?
Yep.
It was about 6 years ago.
Well,
Same guy.
Hurricane Dorian. If you remember Hurricane Dorian, everyone, that was on September 5th of 2019.
Oh
Yes,
yeah.
from
Oh yeah.
2019. And that's when I was introduced to the Heart Man, Billy Hayes. He was on the Mike Morales show. And so we were dissecting how that hurricane was moving and why it formed. First, the strangest thing was you had a lot of Sahara dust that was being blown over from Africa. And it comes across the Atlantic all the time into South America and into the Gulf. And when that dust gets up in the atmosphere, it's supposed to dissipate any big hurricanes and break them apart. Well, that we've been monitoring that for months, and on
The
that September
Atlantic
5th,
Ocean.
when
The
that's
Atlantic
what
Ocean.
did I say Pacific?
I
Yeah, the Atlantic Ocean. So
yeah. Okay.
obviously, the Atlantic Ocean. Forgive me if I said that wrong,
No, I don't know.
but
I don't know if you did, but go ahead.
right across so that Hurricane Dorian formed over the Caribbean, and it was spinning the wrong direction, and the reason why it was spinning the wrong direction is they shot an array into it, and they manipulated it, and it parked itself over the Bahamas. If anyone
Oh
remembers
yeah.
that hurricane, it sat on top of the Bahamas for 48 hours. How does a hurricane do that? Why does it do it? It just sat there. It was moving, 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 moving
Hey,
all
he
the way
was
along,
taking
and
a
then just
coffee
sat.
break. He was taking a break.
and it destroyed the Bahamas. And they also say the theory behind that is that there was a Chinese contingent there. So remember, DT was president then. This is 2018, and there was something going on. The Donald Trump, don't trust China, China asshole. Sorry about that, Marco. But there's a song, Donald Trump, don't trust China, China asshole. And so that stayed there on the Bahamas. And Billy came into the show and started talking about how and what they were doing in manipulating that hurricane. And that's when I said, wow, Billy's a wealth of knowledge. I have to go out right now and interview this man. So I got in contact with him within a couple months and went out there and interviewed him for 3 days. And those interviews will be available on Jon Hart Crane
And
within the next couple months.
So that started it. Now, the HAARP array that I would have thought what was that HAARP array down in South America, that big thing that collapsed just recently? You remember the name of that one?
I don't remember the name of that one, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Things
That
have
was
just slipped my head. There's so
up?
much information to process. The one that you were speaking about in Norway, though, that's called the Eyes Cat, and it's the newest one, and it is 100 megawatts.
Yeah.
That is so much power of manipulation of our atmosphere. The HAARP array dwarfs it in contrast. I believe the HAARP array back in the 90s when they were first using it before they took it out of commission, it was only 10 megawatts. Now, what I understand from Jim Lee is that there's only one HAARP array. It's only one. And all these other NexRads, they're not really HAARPs. Whether they're mini HAARPs or not remains to be seen, but they do use those NexRad arrays and all the arrays around to manipulate and shoot frequencies out. So they're all based off of what our military and the governments did in Alaska with the HAARP array. It's now active again, and who knows what they're doing with it. They fired it back up. But the Eyes Cat in Norway, 100 megawatts, we don't even know what they're doing with it yet. It's just sitting there kind of waiting in the wings. And but the one you're speaking about down in South Africa or South America, it collapsed. Oh gosh, these names are the tip of my head. Tip of my tongue.
Yeah, it was huge. And I don't know if it collapsed. Sometimes they get rid of things, right? Maybe there's something new that's going on. And another thing is I heard that like these next you're not talking about Doppler now. You're talking about all the arrays that the weather uses. You're talking about the Doppler systems? The Doppler systems are used.
All systems.
Okay, because I heard they recently did a lot of changes to them where they can communicate with each other, the entire country at the same time. Now, can you imagine if you could have all the Dopplers on one system and all of a sudden point to one direction and all do the same thing? What is that going to do? It can move things, correct? Remember that last, what was that last tornado, that big one that did a ton of damage? That was another one of those things that was unexplainable. I forget what did the tornado have a name or something? Do you remember that? It was 2 years ago, right?
We see it all the time on Mike Morales' show or Carol from Never Lose Truth. She's always looking at NexRad systems and how they fire all up from Florida into Kansas, and you just watch the systems whip around it. So this is another interesting way of looking at why they would want to do this. You want to shift people's paradigms. You want people to start understanding how this is even possible. It's to sit there and put yourself in the shoes of anyone that has money, that is a scientist or in the military. You think that they don't want to protect their installations? You think they don't want to hide their troop movements in the 50s or the 60s? So they do this. Why wouldn't they want to manipulate the weather? Oh, you hear it. Oh, they can't do that. They can't control the weather. They wouldn't want to manipulate. Why would they want to do that, Marco? Why wouldn't they? They do everything else.
Well, they do that, and electric companies pay. But one of the things they do it for that they'll never tell you, and you have to think about this. We have roughly 80. Well, we had 100, but let's say we got about 70 or 80 nuclear facilities. And these nuclear facilities have what's called spent radioactive rods. These are after when they do outages, they have to take these rods, uranium, and here's the issue. Nobody wants them. When they said it was renewable energy, they never figured out where they're going to put these things. So they're all sitting at every nuclear site. And by the way, every nuclear power plant has outlived its design life. So they just gave them 20 more years, which is completely insane. And so what they do with these rods, they built little buildings with 12-inch masonry block, like they built Kmart's, and they put these things in them next to the nuclear power plant. Now, watch this. They're all over the place. There's at least 60 to 100 buildings full of these things. And now you got Mr. Tornado coming up, down south. If it hits this building, for example, the reactor near New York City, everybody in New York City's dead, okay? Or they're going to have cancer like within 24 hours. And so here comes this hurricane or whatever it is. And they're like, whoa, we can't have this building be hit by a tornado. So what they do, they use HARP, they use Doppler, they use sounding rockets, they use air cell injection. There's 10 different things they use
Ground-based
to move,
systems.
right? They move it. I mean, think about this. If you take an airplane and you use JP8 fuel, this is what they use today, right? It's supposed to be high altitude fuel, now used in all planes. And what does it have? Barium, strontium, aluminum oxide. And this stuff is the byproduct through the jet fuel. And of course, the pilots don't know. It's just jet fuel, right? And so they shoot this jet fuel. And of course, particles will grab water. And that's how you get those things that dim the planet, right? And you got the whole sky full of those. What happens when you shoot frequency or a HARP array into it? It moves them around. So these little particles are moving around because they're getting excited. And guess who moves? Oh, Mr. Tornado says, oh, I think I'll take a left turn. And they do this. So we don't have major nuclear destruction. And this is what I know they're doing this. That's what those sounding rockets do. You never hear about it, but that's what they're used for. And that's just another form of weather modification, correct? I mean,
Correct. And they've been launching sounding rockets since the 50s. Lists upon lists, thousands of sounding rockets you never even hear about. You hear a space launch from NASA that happens, or from Elon's brand SpaceX. Those are just a small portion of all the stuff that you don't get to hear about. And those sounding rockets essentially release so much particulate matter and nanobite technology into the atmosphere. It dwarfs what we see coming out of the back of those flying mechanisms that transport people around the planet these days. When I was growing up, Marco, I would look up at the sky, and I remember one time asking my dad, as a little yanking on his leg, and just saying, "Hey, Dad, what's coming out of that plane right now?" And he told me it was the sensation trail. And so I don't want to say any words, but what I want to tell people is it's whatever's coming out of our wonderful flying mechanisms, that is pollution. No matter what, it's got a certain mixture, and it's all different. And it's such a complex mixture in the sky these days that they know how to use it and manipulate it. I'll give you the phrase. Whether you get into an argument with someone that says, oh no, that's coming out of the plane is this. No, what's coming out of the plane is this. It's like beer. Tastes great, less filling. What is it? It's still beer. Whatever's coming out of that planes, it's still pollution, and they form cirrus clouds. Cirrus clouds matter.
I have a really good friend I grew up with. We hung out. I swear we were 4 years old. Ted is his name. I won't say his last name. And I remember we did a lot of stuff, a lot of kid things. Back then kids were different, And he entered a contest, and he was, I think he was young, maybe in 6th or 7th grade or 5th grade. And he drew a picture, and they're supposed to do a picture, and they entered it. Back then we had 2 newspapers in Cleveland, the Plain Dealer and the Press. He drew this picture, and it was he was looking up at the sky, and there was the sun and a little tree. Kids draw pictures, and these 2 little airplanes with, of course, their little things going behind them. And what it said on this picture was, "See them pretty in the sky. Will their fumes cause us to die?" This is my buddy Ted when he was 7 years old. He won the contest.
It's a while ago.
Oh, it was in the 70s. Okay. He won the contest and it was put, I believe, on the front page of one of the newspapers, congratulating this little 6-year-old, about airplanes. And so I called Teddy about 4 or 5 years ago. I said, I want that photo. I'll give you $1,000 for that picture. And he can't find it. He did find the article that was, published, but this is a kid, one of my buddies. Will their fumes cause us to die?
You,
Ironic.
you're making, that almost belongs on weathermodificationhistory.com, which you can also find some articles back in the 50s. As soon as the planes were up in the air, New Jersey and Illinois actually brought a lawsuit against the FAA for what they were doing up in the atmosphere. But
Oh,
that quickly died down. What I find interesting is with that 1978 environmental modification bill, is in many ways it kind of quelled anyone who was going to be speaking out and writing about these things in magazine or any type of article or newspapers. For whatever reason, it almost seemed like it put the clamps down on the public information or any newscaster that wanted to report about this stuff, because you don't get to learn about this. You're never going to get this stuff from mainstream news, so you have to do it yourself. And you have to be able to speak about it and use certain phrasing from whoever, me, you, Marco, Jim Lee, Mike Morales, to go out and try and change people's paradigms regarding how we're being manipulated. The land, air, water, the law, they're messing with it, which means they're messing with us. And of course, that affects our health. That affects us
you know,
mentally, physically, and spiritually.
it used to be a lot easier to do exactly what you're saying, but in the last couple of years, Google, I'm not going to say they censor it, but what they do is they shadow ban these people. And so if you want to look up what you and me are talking about, it is not going to be enough. You're going to have to use the right tag words and go like the page 20, and there it is. And like just like our buddy Mike Morales, he has to switch daily from his 3 different sites, and he doesn't just go, he's just not on YouTube, and he goes to all these channels. YouTube just right, I guess YouTube has demonetized him, and they shut him down. And what's funny is I'll be listening to him, and he'll get into something like this, and all of a sudden his computer starts going crazy, and then I can't hear him, or something bad happens. Like, it's not an accident, okay? It's not an accident the way they manipulate the internet, because they do not want, they want you to buy little doggy raincoats, okay, that match your raincoat, so you can show all your neighbors that you can walk your little doggy when it rains. They want you to see the little girl do her little Wednesday dance, and these kids and these people, eh, I don't know what it is, but either we're just getting dumber, or they're trying to make it look like we're getting dumber. I just know one thing: stuff that I used to research 15, 20 years ago, and I start looking for them now, I can't find them. I can't find some of the stuff, especially the stuff on Agenda, that 2 and that 1, okay, and the wildlands, that whole project. It's hard to find this stuff. And I just found out one of my favorite Agenda 2, that other number
Yep, yep,
1
yep.
from California. She's died. She's dead. She was like huge about this.
Rosalind.
Yeah, I don't want to say any names, but she died. Gee, I wonder why. I mean, I was like looking for her to see what she's up to. She's dead, and she was talking about this whole Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit meeting in 1992, where 18,000 people showed up and 100 countries signed up to it, including back then our president said, yes, we will become slaves to this Earth Summit program, which, by the way, right after that, they started taking land away and playing that whole game, whatever happened at that. Okay. And there's books on it. You could buy United Nations, and you could look this stuff up. Actually, you could buy books. Have you ever seen the library from United Nations? All this stuff is there, buddy, but the books are $300, $300. Like, the average person isn't going to buy books from the United Nations, but it's there. They're telling you what they're doing, man. I don't know about this weather modification stuff, but where the world's going, it's all there. It's all there. It's
In,
been there.
in 1961, they wrote a book called The Manipulation of Human Behavior. And you cannot find that book very many places these days.
That book is
Um,
worth thousands of dollars.
if you look on Amazon, it's 99 cents for Kindle, but $1,000 if you could ever find the hardback. And that type of manipulation continues to go on of what they want us to know and not want us to know. And that plays out with what Mike Morales' show was about. Again, when I first started watching him, going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, we watched that vortex be split apart. And I continue to watch Mike because I watched him and I saw all the different programs that he was using that any person can use, but he shows you how to use them and how he interprets them. And when he began doing more and more shows, I stepped away for a day and I turned on mainstream news and I said, wow, this is for preschoolers. I watched like what the weather report was on mainstream or local news. It's like, this is for young people. This is for people who don't want to learn anything. And so I went back to Mike. And what are you supposed to do when you're trying to learn from someone and he's talking about Kansas, but the shot is on Tasmania? He's talking about Kansas and the shot is on Tasmania. So I started watching Mike. Now, for everyone, I used to work in video production in New York City. I'm very aware of how mainstream news works and also how media works and how to also kind of dumb down and manipulate people with video. So I started watching his live broadcasts and I would see everything would be going smoothly. And then on the upload the next day, all of a sudden, about 10 minutes in, the audio would be shifted. And then 20 minutes in, it shifted even more. So as you're trying to learn from him of how to use these programs, you can't. I started recording his shows and then seeing where the audio would go wrong. And then I started watching the live stream and I would pay very close attention to his audio in the live stream, which is of course live, as to when they would futz it, as to when it would get pulsed or targeted or tagged. So that on his upload, so how this works for everybody, you go live and then you upload it and the system takes the upload and puts it on for everybody to watch later. I would see where they would tag him during the live, and then lo and behold, I would look at my notes the next day, that's where the audio would be messed up. So I started learning as to how our wonderful YUO tube that we broadcast on was actually manipulating Mike's shows and making it hard for people to watch. Who wants to watch someone if the audio is all messed up within the first 5-10 minutes? Not many. And people were trying to send links out for people. Hey, watch the upload, watch Mike's show. It became more and more difficult to do that. And they were doing it for a reason. And as a person who wants people to be able to speak their minds, I found that royally disheartening that this was going on in the social media community and that people were actually being censored. But the thing is that when people find the truth and they're actually trying to put the information out there and they're taken out for it or just they're messed with or manipulated, well, that means that they've stumbled upon something very important. And I continued to watch Mike, and that's when I found out about Jim Lee, and that's when I went out and interviewed all these people, because that seemed to be my path as to where everything was leading me, to find out more information about EMFs, about frequency manipulation, about what all this technocracy and the technocrats are doing to this planet and have been doing to it for a long time. Marko, I want to jump back to HAARP before our hour's up. The history of HAARP.
We did get off a little bit, didn't we?
Yeah,
Hey,
HAARP was.
I do
Go
want to
ahead.
say when you were doing this, and I don't know, because during that time, I'm thinking 2-3 years ago, I would once in a while jump in, into a Mike Morales show, and he would be saying something, and then all of a sudden he'd be saying something, but the whole thing was chopped up. So the video was not the same thing that he was saying, and his mouth wasn't the same thing. It was it was like there's no way he could have made this accident on his own. And I'll tell you what, honestly, I was annoyed. And I can't do this. And I would just leave because it wasn't working for me. And that's what they were doing. I kind of knew it. And they do this to a bunch of people. There's one guy, like Dana Dunford. Okay, I'm like a nuclear activist. That's one of my big things. And that guy's on every night. And this guy only has 20 to 30 people because they totally censor him. I mean, people get paid in the nuclear industry to go and censor and and and
You
and,
said the
and, and
word.
yeah, what's that word called? Shills, right? Not just people who.
Mick West is one of those. He's definitely
Well,
one.
shills get paid, and there's like non-governing entities, NGOs that pay these people. Like remember during the presidential campaign, all these people were like pushing, like, oh, he lies, he lies, he lies. Oh, vote, whatever. These people were getting paid by non-governing entities and organizations, and they got paid to do this. And people just don't get it. They think this is normal, and shadow banning is normal. And like now you got this whole Twitter thing with that other billionaire, right, going on. It's insane. Here's the thing I know. Okay, and then we'll get right back to. I know one thing.
No,
There's no
Marco,
accidents.
this has been more of a this is more of a video about informative facts and censorship, and how to break people's paradigms,
Yeah. Okay. But
which is
here's
fine
the
because
one thing.
people need to know about that too. It's about our trajectories on this planet and how we go out and find and discern information and open our
Oh,
minds to it.
now back to our buddy that recently deceased. Um, he- when he worked at Harp, didn't he didn't something happen to him or one of his buddies where I guess a couple people died? Do you remember any of that? Did he talk about any of that?
Sure.
He had an accident.
Well, any of these towers, or specifically something that's 10 megawatts, or like the IceCat in Norway, that's 100 megawatts, and that's the one that's active right now. The HARP, we don't really know what they're doing with. But when you're building these things, one false move, you can fry yourself. So that some of Billy's friends died at the HARP array. You could take Billy talks about how he would roast a hot dog off of one of these things and eat up there. So he's got tons of stories, and these types of accidents do happen in these types of installations, like any military operation.
And so he did have a situation where a couple guys got fried, and he was lucky or something. I remember hearing
Oh, sure.
something about.
And he fried his leg too. I mean, there you work on these things that can, you get too close to them, you get into the wrong zone. Like think of it, just if this is the array and you get a little bit too close to it, you fry your entire body.
So think about that. Well, what about all these people that live in buildings that got cell towers above them, and people who live in front of Dopplers? I mean, they're getting fried, right? Would you think?
I mean, okay, let's put it this way. Anyone living in New York City right now, you have all these arrays that are everywhere, or just cell phone towers on top of buildings. These poor folks, I used to live in New York, I used to work in New York City. We didn't have Wi-Fi going through our buildings all the time 15 years ago. Everything has changed so much on our planet in the last 10 to 15 years. You kind of wonder why Alzheimer's is up 400% for people under the age of 44. You could be in an apartment building in New York City. You could have a nice little room, 400 square foot room, and you might have 100 signals of Wi-Fi going through you. Everyone's Wi-Fi going
You
through you
know,
at once.
back
And no
back to
one
the
recognizes this. It's like a smoking plane.
back to the New York thing. You remember, 2, 3 years ago, where all those people were in the buildings and bad things were happening to them because of that cold that was going around, and they weren't allowed to leave those buildings. Do you remember that?
100%, Marco,
Now,
100%.
now, 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 let's think about this. Now, I'm like one of the few people in Northeast Ohio that I call frequency inspection. So you could check for all kind of electromagnetic fields, magnetism, radiation, radio frequency. I got all the gauges for that, and I know one thing: all these people were in these high rises in 3 different countries. Remember the ones in France and China and then New York, right? And all those people, they went out the back door in bags, right? Body bags. Well, they're all stuck in there, right? and you got the radio towers, and you got everybody locked in there, and they got all their phone chargers plugged into their walls, and you got everybody locked in the house with the phone chargers and watching TV and cooking, and they're completely using a ton of electricity, which is causing major harmonics, major dirty voltage, especially in electrical lines, and so the whole building becomes a transmitter. They're like living in an antenna. And ready for this? They're all wearing Reeboks tennis shoes. They're all wearing Nikes. $200 tennis shoes because that's what television tells you to buy. Buy those tennis shoes because everybody's wearing them. I mean, people
Frequencies,
treat
Marco,
tennis shoes.
frequencies.
Oh, frequencies. Well, no. The tennis shoes is very important. Okay, I'm getting to a point. So they're wearing these tennis shoes, which don't ground them. So now they're in his building, they're locked into it. All these electrical currents, all these things going on, and the harmonics is going up, and the dirty voltage is going up. And guess what? Their body voltage goes up. You see, we are electrical walking units. And we have like a couple millivolts. But the minute our electricity goes up in our bodies from induced electrical fields caused by harmonics being locked in wearing tennis shoes because we're not grounding ourselves, you need to ground yourself, okay? And now your immune system goes down. And when your immune system goes down, somebody sneezes in the elevator shaft and everybody gets sick and everybody wearing Nike shoes has high voltage, a low immune system, and they end up going out in a body bag. That's what happened in our buildings during this time. So tennis shoes ground. You ever see that movie? And we'll get right back. You Better Call Sal. It's
Better
not a
Call
movie. It was the
Saul.
one. What is it?
TV
Salt.
show,
Better
Better Call
Call Sal.
Saul. Yep.
Well,
Yep.
he had a
And his
dad.
brother who had EMF sensitivity.
Yes, and when you walked in his house, you had to touch a ground rod. Okay, to ground yourself. That is real. That's real stuff. Folks, you need to ground yourself every day. Take your shoes off. Go outside. Don't go to the front tree line where electrical poles are and you got ground wires because that's dirty electricity. Go in your backyard, ground yourself, go back in and start up again. That's how you keep your immune system. Did you start this with New York City? You got me up on a tangent.
A little bit of New York City, but I'll continue on with that. We're going well off of one another. A great book is called Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg. He dissects dirty electricity and EMFs very well in this book. It's a wealth of information. The medical construct does not want this book in front of people, but it's been there for a long time. He's very highly sensitive. I've spoken to him. I hope to interview him one day. Now, about
What is it
grounding,
called again? What's
it's
the book
called
called?
Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg.
I'm going to
And
read that. I'm going to have to read that
it's,
book.
it's a great book, audio book or whatnot. Now, about grounding, if anyone wants a health and healing technique or tip, one, don't have a cell phone in your room when you sleep at night. Turn your Wi-Fi off at night. But if you're ever frazzled or you get pulsed in the wrong way, go lay on the ground for 30 seconds. Reset your body system. Stretch or whatnot. Just go outside, get out of your house, and lay on the ground if you can. And that will help recharge and reset. It's kind of like pressing the reset or the start button on your computer. And that's exactly what you're doing because you're getting in touch with the ground and the 7.83 hertz, the Schumann resonance, that's natural coming out of the earth. And that frequency, 7.83 hertz, is also called the God frequency. It's called the frequency of life. And that's what the earth is always pulsing out. And that's what's natural. It's more of the reason why we are here. But when you're in your home and you got all these signals bombarding you, when you're in New York City, you got to get out of New York City. You got to escape the cities as much as you can. It's like escaping the giant net that continues to drop down on us. Get out into nature as much as you can. It's becoming more and more important for your immune system. I agree with you, Marco, as to how and why people might have gotten sick in New York City, but you were 2 years into those subway systems, all of a sudden becoming microwave tubes within a microwave because they put cellular technology so people could be on and in the platforms or in the subway tunnels on their phone while going wherever they need to. It's kind of amazing that 2 to 3 years later, so many people started dropping like flies or got sick. It's because their immune systems are being bombarded and radiated like mad. And that's something we have to deal with.
You mentioned the Schumann resonance, and I know that the way they calculate that is they take all the lightning bolts all over the world, and that's how the Schumann resonance gets calculated. But more importantly, is that our frequency is almost on the same frequency as the Schumann. Now, this is an interesting point. When we took astronauts into space, they don't tell you this, but they had to put the Schumann resonance frequency into the space capsules because they couldn't
Really?
survive going to the moon or whatever.
I,
We're not going to get on that one. But when they went into space, they had to have it, which now makes you wonder. Well, all these conspiracy people, oh, they're living underground. They got the tunnels. Sure, they got tunnels. We know who drills all those tunnels, but they can't live underground. You can't live underground without the Schumann resonance. So they got to be pumping this frequency down there. And I don't think anybody really knows we can't survive without the Schumann frequency. And what's crazy about this frequency is that, and I already used the word harmonics. This is a different form of it, but it has 4 harmonics. And it's like, I'm not going to say they're each double, but the third harmonics of the Schumann frequency, which is like 36 or something, that is where we become artists. That was like Shakespeare, Plato, Nostradamus. All those people got their um, their artistic thinking capabilities on the third. I don't know if it's a derivative, but the third harmonic of the Schumann resonance. So we're kind of getting off it. You should have said Schumann resonance,
I
but
probably shouldn't, but I'll give everyone one more thing. Get your pens and papers, everybody. Write this down. This is a great documentary and the best one I've seen done on 5G as well as 3G or 4G. It's called Resonance Beings of Frequency. Resonance Beings of Frequency. You can probably find it on Vimeo or YouTube or wherever. It's for free. Definitely check that out. The first 20, 30 minutes, my mind was blown. My mind was blown, and I had to stop watching it because there's just so much information that comes out, and you start connecting the dots. And I'm a type of person, kind of like you, we're paranoid or open-minded enough, but paranoid just enough to connect the dots. So if you want to write something else down, weathermodificationhistory.com, Climate Viewer 3D, Mike Morales, Jim Lee, Invisible Rainbow. What else did we discuss tonight, Marco? I think we discussed a
I,
lot.
you we're getting close to the 60-minute. Is there a couple things that you want to that we were supposed to cover? I think on the arrays, or you think we got it all?
Well, we didn't really talk about the technique, I don't know, the
Is there
techniques
any way we could
behind
do this again?
use or
Maybe is it okay if we do this again in a couple of weeks? So I'll give you a call and we'll get into this one more time, and then maybe we could
absolutely.
talk more about how they actually work. I know right now they're shooting beams. This is what they're telling us. They're shooting beams to Jupiter, okay, and then rebounding off of Jupiter for some scientific thing. You and me both know what they tell us isn't what's going on, right? I mean,
It's called the Brittany Griner array.
what they tell you isn't what's going on ever, right? I mean, just like what's his face is shooting rockets up into the sky. He's got 33,000. He's going to put 33,000 rockets up there and satellites, and people think it's for 5G. They actually think this is for 5G. This is how crazy this world is. Those are all government classified projects. Of course, of course, there's going to be some 5G on it, right? It's amazing. The bamboo
100%.
is the word. Can I say the word bamboozlement? Is that a word, bamboozlement?
You've made it one, and I think it works. Bamboozlement. We've been bamboozled. We've been hoodwinked. They keep
What's
on
really fun?
hoodwinking us.
What's funny is these people sit there, they turn on their Fox and CNN and MSNBC, and they think that's the news.
MSLSD.
They think that's the news. That's news. That's what they think.
Called programming.
Yeah.
Now, another thing to think about is, you want to reprogram people, but a new phrase is actually you want to renew your brain. You want to renew it. You want to refresh it. You want to heal yourself. So, however, there's so many techniques that are out there. There's so much information out there. You can hit me up at johnhartcrane.com, or no, not at johnhartcrane at Gmail, or just go to my YouTube channel, Jon Hart Crane. and hit me up there. But at the same time, there's a wealth of knowledge, and I'm just starting out on this journey. I've bided my time for the last couple of years of just holding back on releasing a lot of information because I wasn't ready. And now, thank you for having me on, Marco, but thank you for letting me just kind of spew out a lot of information. And hopefully it'll help some people. I know phrasing and talking to people daily, sometimes people just turn and look at me like, well, that's an interesting way of phrasing it. We're not conspiracy theorists. We're conspiracy realists. We're conspiracy realists. We're paranoid just enough to connect the dots. And as you do that, your mind opens even more, and it allows you to see a much bigger picture. The last thing I'll say in this is that a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? That's what we're taught. That's the programming. But what about the picture frame? That's about 100,000 words. And you and I are outside the picture frame in a bazillion words trying to discern as much as we can. And when you see the frame in the picture, then the transparency sheets begin to drop down on the picture and things become a little bit more clear. So we know we are being bamboozled. And we know when the headlines or when they're telling us something to kind of run the other direction. Whatever mainstream tells you, go the other direction.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just end it real quick that if you want the truth is in your mind. And the only way you could create truth in your mind is by researching all the bias, all of them. And once you get all the bias, then you could actually form an opinion, and that can become the truth, your truth. And we all have our own truth. Hey, everybody, thanks
Marco,
for coming on.
we
If there are
have to
any
retitle this. We have to retitle this video. It's got to be something like "Fact Finding with Nigro and Marco."
you know what? They censor me. I want to thank everybody for coming on, and thank you,
Bye,
Mr.
everyone.
Nigro. And we're going to talk again. We're going to do this again and get a little bit more into the harp. And then any
Hey,
questions? I'm
thanks for having
sorry.
me on for my first time. This is ever first time I've ever gone live
Well,
really on YouTube.
this is the first time I use this. YouTube has this like go on with somebody. I guess I get it because you have to have so many subscribers and you get this feature. So it was actually great. So we don't have to go downtown. My little green screen office downtown. I haven't been there. I don't have to go there anymore. I'm sitting in my couch right here, and you're in your little couch somewhere, right? It's a great service. It's quick. It's easy. No lights, no green screens. I'm going to probably do this. So, hey, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk, buddy. All right?
From the Sergeant Bilko from the movie Aliens. Look into my eye.
Hey, good night.
Always better, everybody. Much
Always
love.
better.